Hello, Elix 30. This is Michael, and we are in How to Be Human, An Autistic Man's Guide to Life by Jory Fleming. And we are beginning Chapter 4, Emotional Distancing. And this begins on page 73. Talking about emotions. One of the major stereotypes about autism is that people on the autistic spectrum lack emotions. But interestingly, our own scientific understanding of human emotion is in the midst of a major revision. New neuroscience research is centered around the concept that emotions are not intrinsic to human beings, that they are not hardwired as part of our collective makeup, but instead are individually constructed by the receiver's brain, using physical, mental, and even cultural cues. Rather than being universal, each person's emotional makeup is both subjective and highly different. Psychologist and neuroscience researcher Lisa Feldman Barrett makes the case that a central way the brain creates emotions is by making predictions. It separates input based on similarities and differences, and then summarizes that information to create concepts such as happy or sad. Jory's experiences with emotion and his understanding of emotion are both very individual and very complex. He does not, for example, experience hurt feelings and emotional wounds. Large group displays of emotion make him uneasy in much the same way that he gets uneasy around people drinking alcohol, because after a few drinks, the personalities and language of the people who are drinking noticeably shift, and they give off different signals. We had many discussions about the multiple facets and nuances of emotion, but within those, one statement stands out. When he said, "Emotions seem to be happening further away from me." It is not that Jory lacks emotions, but rather that he has his own individual emotional register. Jory: I can't inhibit someone else's mind, but from what I understand, let's start that again. I can't inhabit someone else's mind, but from what I understand, I'm pretty sure my emotions are the same, or at least very similar. My response is probably the difference. I am affected less. Not in the sense that I'm not aware of emotions, but I can basically ignore them for all intents and purposes. Even positive emotions I'll sort of be aware of, but not fully internalize in the same way. For me, there's also no such thing as being a little bit sad or slightly unhappy. I either am or I'm not. It has to reach a certain threshold of intensity. I have to think about everything connected with emotions. It's almost like there is a sensory experience, and to process it, I have to construct a rapid, large-scale analysis. I feel like whenever I do have an emotional reaction, it's always specific in the sense that I can tell you what caused its formation. It doesn't just appear. It's almost like a chemical reaction, where with most people it would just happen automatically. But there's an extra step that I have to go through before that sort of process can happen. I also don't usually hold on to emotions. Sad, happy, upset, joyful, those are all things where I understand the definition and have been aware of that emotion before. But I normally don't keep the emotion around or reflect on it. I feel like I have a different mental positioning for emotions, not necessarily looking down on them from above, but maybe pushing them off to the side. Emotions seem to be happening further away from me. If I do nothing, then whatever emotion it is will just stream past, and then it will be gone. I would describe it as if you're walking somewhere. You're moving in a straight line, and out of the corner of your eye, somebody sort of says something, and you're not sure if it's entirely directed at you, but you think it is. Depending on the situation, you either keep going and ignore it, or turn and look. Or you catch a glimpse out of the corner of your eye. If it's a lot to process in your visual field, you're going to ignore what's in the corner, versus sometimes you may take a quick look. But then you move your eyes forward again. It's not that an emotion is less important, but it's less immediate. Even really strong emotional specs take up a little more than a corner, but never so much that you can't see the rest. Similar to how Jory finds reading facial expressions and body language during conversations to be challenging, he has difficulties picking up on other people's emotions and understanding them, regardless of how they are expressed. But his efforts to recognize emotion have led him to make some very interesting observations about the ways that crowds embrace a common emotion. He is deeply curious how so many people can end up in emotional sync and what underlies that process. For example, do people in a crowd consciously choose to be angry together? Or is it more of a subconscious, instinctive process where everyone joins in almost without thinking? Jory: I'm generally bad at noticing and reading other people's reactions. There are a few emotions that I catch really quickly, and those are usually the negative ones. When somebody is hurt, angry, or when they're fearful, those display really rapid responses in people's behavioral shifts. All the other ones are slow enough where it's not quite as stark. I am aware of when large groups of people all feel the same thing quickly. It's weird because I can feel that something has changed, like people weren't angry before, but now they're angry. I personally am not angry at all, but I can sense that now everybody else is angry, and that's really weird. What happened between 10 seconds ago and now? In some cases, I was not able to witness what happened. Maybe it was something that happened at the other end of the crowd, but now everyone's angry. because it's a crowd. That is very interesting to me. One time, I attended a big protest at Oxford. I popped in to see what was going on. There were a few counter-protesters along with the protesters in the crowd. But it was very weird to me because even though both sides were supposedly opposed, what I perceived was that they were all feeling the same things. They were all still connected in that way. It did kind of freak me out. It was odd. LW. Odd how? Jory. Because where does this feeling come from? And where did it start? Did it start with one person? Did it start with a general knowledge that just sort of became emotional among everyone at the same time? Did people consciously accept that? Did people say, I'm going to be angry now because I want to be angry? Or was it subconscious? Did they have any agency in becoming angry? Could they not have become angry if they had sufficient wherewithal? It's a very interesting question to me as to whether you can resist a crowd in that way. I don't know. I didn't stay long because it wasn't a safe place for Daisy. Especially in the inner bits, she got kind of squeezed a little bit. But there were a couple of instances where some person was really angry, and then they realized they had almost stepped on my dog's foot. They stopped to say, "Oh, I'm really sorry." And they broke out of it. But then they re-entered that emotion. It was such a stark contrast. I could see it in their eyes in particular. Being able to go in and out of emotions like that, it's just very, very odd to me. Any sort of decrease in the ability to be separate and more in control is concerning. I've been to some protests and find them really good displays of democracy in many cases, but it does freak me out, even if I find it to be a useful civic engagement practice. LW. What's the most disconcerting part for you about that type of behavior? Jory. What I find hard to comprehend is, do people have a set of rules for governing that behavior? Or do they just latch on to a feeling in air? When it's that strong, I can also sort of feel it. And I really don't like that feeling. I do not like it when crowds start to act in a coordinated fashion. To me, it's like all the individuals have become lost in some way, but then they can come back. So it's not like a permanent loss, but to me, it does feel like a loss, because in part, I can't join in myself. I could be present in a crowd, but I can't really latch on in that way. And I wouldn't want to do that either. I also get this uneasy feeling when people are drinking alcohol, because I notice that their behavior shifts, their language shifts, and the signals that they give off shift as well. I have real trouble dealing with shifts in signals. When people join a crowd's emotion, suddenly they go from displaying different signals to displaying really similar signals really quickly. That's probably what's disconcerting to me. In the same way, when one individual person has had a few drinks, it changes their signals, even if they're not totally drunk. That makes me uneasy as well. And we'll stop right there.